A very good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Trade Policy Advisor Group discussion, the future of WTO reform initiatives. It is my pleasure to be your MC for this occasion. I am Maria Rosari from the Secretariat of Trade Policy Agency of the Ministry of Trade, Republic of Indonesia. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to the Honorable Head of Trade Policy Agency of the Ministry of Trade, Republic of Indonesia, Bapak Kasan, Lead Advisor ERIA, Ibu Lili Yan Ing, our speakers, Professor Daniel Traveler, Chair in Competitiveness and Prosperity at the Rodman School of Management, Senior Research Fellow at National Bureau of Economic Research, Dr. Lee Kwang Lan, Director of Market Integration Directorate, ASEAN Secretariat, His Excellency Bapak Dandi Satria Iswara, Deputy to Permanent Representative or Ambassador, Permanent Mission of the Republic of Indonesia to the UN, WTO, and other international organizations in Geneva. Our moderator, Dr. Muhammad Dian Revindo, Associate Director of LPEM FEB, Universitas Indonesia. Our contributor from ITAPS IPB, Dr. Tony Irawan and Professor Amzul Rifin. Expert staffs, senior advisors, director generals, and directors from the Ministry of Trade, and all offline and online participants. Ladies and gentlemen, the Trade Policy Advisory Group, or Trade-PAG, is a collaborative activity between the Trade Policy Agency, Ministry of Trade, Republic of Indonesia, with the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, or ERIA, and the International Trade Analysis and Policy Studies of the Bogor Agricultural Institute of ITAPS IPB, which aims to produce recommendations to the Minister of Trade by conducting a discussion forum with key experts. This event will take place in English language, conducted hybrid using Zoom conference, and we will record the event to be published in the Trade Policy Agency's YouTube channel. Before proceeding to the main event, allow me to kindly invite the Head of Trade Policy Agency to deliver his opening remarks. To Bapak Kasan, the time is yours.
Good morning to you all and honorable speakers here, Professor Daniel Traveler, Chair in Competitiveness and Prosperity at the Rodman School of Management and Senior Research Fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research. Thank you for your coming. And also the speaker, Dr. Lee Kwang Lan, Director of Market Integration from ASEAN Secretariat. Thank you, Mr. Dr. Lan. His Excellency Pak Dani Satria Iswara, who joined with the virtual meeting from Geneva. He is ambassador to the WTO. And also our friends, moderator, Pak Muhammad Dian Revindo, Associate Director of LPM FEB Universitas Indonesia. Honorable guests and participants, special from Embassy representative from Australia, also from South Africa, India is on the way, Mozambique and the EU will join us to this event. Our colleagues from Ministry of Trade, expert staff, Hadi, all directors from the Ministry of Trade, and also Director and Director General from the Ministry of Trade, and special to Ibu Lili Lead Advisor of the area, who provide this event for cooperation between our Ministry of Trade, ITAPS from IPB University in Bogor, and also the area. So these three parties together to join this event. I would like to inform before we move to presentation from the speakers and also the discussion with all the participants. So first of all, let us give praise and thanks to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala because we can be present here together today for the Trade-PAG activity with the topic the future of WTO reform initiatives. I think this topic is very hot and very important issues, not only for Indonesia itself, but also for all the WTO members. And Trade-PAG is a meeting forum discussion with key experts that is organized together by three institutions, as I already mentioned, from Ministry of Trade, ERIA, and also the ITAPS. And today, event is the 5th time for our team of the Trade-PAG. We have scheduled, we have already planned to have the event of the Trade-PAG in this year also. Usually Trade-PAG has a close participant consisting only the organizer institutions. But today, this is a special occasion in that we also invite representative embassy of Indonesia trading partner in Jakarta. So because this topic, as I said, this is, I am very sure that this can become a brainstorming forum or discussion to you all. Mr. Simon asked me and Christine, this topic can be discussed anything? I say yes. Anything about WTO reform. We can discuss about, for example, I also talked to Prof. Traveler. We can discuss about the subsidies. We can talk about Indonesian issues interesting on policies from Indonesia and other issues. So I think this is opportunity for you and us, and we can discuss. And today's discussion is related to WTO reform, especially in improving work practice and institutional operation, as well as overcoming obstacles encountered in implementing new trade policy negotiations. So input from experts as well as the participant will enrich policy option in order to assist the government, particularly Ministry of Trade of the Republic of Indonesia, in formulating policy strategies to support the WTO reform. And why we invite our ambassador to the WTO, Pak Adandi from Geneva. In particular, I would like to thank to all experts, speaker, moderator, and also contributor. I forget to mention our colleagues from ITAPS, led by Ibu Widya Stuti, Prof. Amzul, and Pak Tony, and her teams, and also Bu Lili, team from area. So these three institutions together and we discuss to be held in this event. The last but not least, I hope that today's discussion can provide benefit for Indonesian development, especially in formulating policy strategies as an effort to establish better priorities for future trade negotiation strategies. Thank you very much, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Bapak Kasan, for the wonderful remarks. The second remarks will be delivered by Area Lead Advisor, Ibu Lili Yan Ing. To Ibu Lili, the time is yours.
Thank you, Bapak Kasan, respected speakers, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of us. On this very important meeting, let me share 3 observations on the WTO reform. First, on Doha development agenda and new issues. From developing countries' points of view, Doha Development Agenda was agreed in November 2001. One of the main issues that has been a concern for developing countries is reducing agricultural subsidies. That's one of the reasons developing countries really push forwards the agenda, because we want to get access to agricultural products, but developed countries has never been want to show their willingness to cut or to reduce agricultural subsidies. And that's one of the reasons very difficult for developing countries to get access for agricultural products to developed countries. But from developed countries' point of view, along the way of this process, they have a concerns on industrial subsidies, on SOEs. And even new issues are emerging on digital trade, on IP, on fisheries, investment facilities, and other issues. So these are some things that we hope that we can discuss today. The second issue is on spatial and differential treatment and development status. One of the main agreements when we formed the WTO is that it takes time for developing countries to provide market access, and there will be a need to provide assistance for developing countries to make such adjustments. And at that meantime, developed countries agrees to provide spatial and differential treatments so that developing countries is kind of in the leverage positions to be able to do adjustments. But then and now development, one of the concerns from developed countries' point of view, because developing status in the WTO is self-declared. So countries with a high income per capita like Singapore, I'm sorry, I need to mention some names very specifically, like Singapore, South Korea are even considered as developing countries, which if we think, we see from GDP per capita are relatively very high. But then again, the proposal now that we have aiming to hit developing countries with a large shares of exports to total world exports, like 0.5%, that really hits most of developing countries, including South Africa, China, India, and Indonesia, which I think using this kind of the share of exports might not be a good solution. The third observation is the roles of the WTO. 3 main roles of the WTO that from my observations cannot, or this is kind of the irreplaceable roles of the WTO that cannot be replaced by any other organizations in the world. One is negotiations, second, monitoring, the third is trade disputes, right? But since December 2019, we only have one dispute settlement member, and it has been stalled. MC12 agreed to be restored, the dispute settlement body, but we don't know the progress yet. So let's see it's gonna be in a good progress. But again, that's something that we need to discuss for today. So those are three observations on development, Doha development agenda, spatial differential treatment, the roles of the WTO, that we are expecting to get insight not only from speakers but also from a country representative and experts that we have today. On behalf of Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, we would like to wish all the best and thank for all these great contributions and cooperations with the Ministry of Trade of Indonesia and the Government of Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Lili, for the enlightening remarks. Gentlemen, now we have come to our main agenda, the discussion session. All presentations and discussions will be moderated by our chair, Dr. Muhammad Dian Revindo. Allow me to read his short bio. Bapak Muhammad Dian Revindo is an Associate Director for the Institute for Economic and Social Research, Faculty of Economics and Business, Universitas Indonesia, LPEM FEBUI, as well as researcher and the head of Business Climate and Global Value Chain Research Group of the Institute, and he earned his PhD in Economics from Lincoln University, New Zealand, and an awardee of New Zealand Asia Scholar Awards from 2013 to 2017. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome our moderator, Bapak Muhammad Dian Revindo.
Good morning, and thank you for the generous introduction. Welcome to the discussion session of the Trade Policy Advisory Group number 5. My name is Revindo, and allow me to chair the discussion session for the next 2 hours, more or less. When I received the invitation to moderate the session, like a couple of weeks ago, I didn't think twice. I immediately said yes. So because this is invaluable opportunity, so thank you, Pak Kasan, thank you, Bu Lili, thank you for our colleague from ITAPS as well. The topic put forward today, the future of WTO reform initiatives, in my view, is important not only from the international economics theoretical point of view, but also very relevant to the current challenge in trade policies encountered by many countries, including Indonesia, because we encounter this kind of issue just recently, right? We know at the theoretical point of view, theoretically, multilateral cooperation is the most optimum form of cooperation, especially WTO with more than 150 member states, right? But of course, at the same time, it's most optimum because it creates trade and it avoids trade diversion. But at the same time, it's very difficult to bring more than 150 member states to come to agreement, right? And that's why we need a reform one way or another. So we are very fortunate to have with us today 3 gentlemen who know a great deal about this issue. We have Prof. Daniel Traveler, we have Dr. Lee Kuang Lan, and His Excellency Bapak Dandi Satria Iswara, who join us online from the Geneva, the Switzerland today. I would like to begin from Professor Traveler. Allow me to read his CV, short CV. Prof. Daniel Traveler is the chair in competitiveness and prosperity at the Rotman School of Management and a senior research fellow at both the Canadian Institute of Advanced Studies and the National Bureau of Economic Research. Professor Traveler He's an internationally respected trade economist known for his path-breaking contribution to fundamental research and his ongoing contribution to public policy debate surrounding inequality, innovation, artificial intelligence, and especially trade agreements. He's currently on the steering committee for the WTO Academic Advisory Board. His work has been cited by the Nobel Committee, the WTO, New York Times, Newsweek, Wall Street Journal, and The Economist. Prof. Traveler, it's all yours.
Lili, a longtime colleague of mine, Dr. Ravindo, Dr. Lan, who we've already had some very interesting conversations. I'm looking forward, and of course to His Excellency Ambassador Dandy, who I'm trying to get my head around the fact that it is 3 o'clock in the morning for him. So the coffee in Geneva must be really, really good. Okay, well, can we put up that slide? And do I have... Perfect. Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to stand up because I'm a university professor and I just love to be the center of attention. So but I also know that people get very, very tired if I'm just sitting there. Do you mind if I have my backs to you? Is that okay? Thank you. All right. So the question for me is, in a group like this, is who needs the WTO? Because the answer is not as obvious as it might think. If we all needed the WTO, we would have been making a lot more progress since 1987. I want to give you 2 examples of people who could use the WTO but don't fully understand how much they could use it. So the first one is the United States. Judging by the unilateral Trump tariffs that the US imposed, you would think that they don't need the WTO, right? Their unilateralism is killing the WTO. And when you look at all of the academic studies that have been done about the effects of President Trump's tariffs, it reduced US GDP by $39.4 billion. So here's a country that thinks it doesn't need the WTO, goes ahead unilaterally, violating WTO rules. It's hurting itself. It's also hurting the rest of us. I want to give you another example. Just waiting for the slides to turn. Great. And that is the People's Republic of China. The People's Republic of China has managed to do some amazing stuff. So I want to give you an example. This is China's productivity growth. This is a very, very detailed measure of productivity growth from between 1998 and 2013. In Canada, we grew by less than 1% by this measure each year. China grew by 10.7% every single year from 1998 to 2013. It's amazing. And for most of us, the lesson from that is, with China, we should do all the things that China did, including subsidies. That's a mistake. It's a mistake for the integrity of the WTO, but it's also a mistake for China, and I don't think most people understand that. So when we break China into 2 parts, the part of the economy in which the state-owned enterprises are less than 50% of the market, that growth goes from 10% to 20%. And when we look at the part of the economy where the state-owned enterprises are more than 50% of the market, that growth doesn't get just a little smaller, it becomes negative. We think because China has done so well that the answer must be subsidies. Wrong. China has done lots of good things, but subsidies is not the model that the rest of us should adopt, and it's undermining the WTO. We should not engage in China's subsidy game. Subsidies are overrated in China, and if we start a subsidy war, which we're well on the way in doing right now, those wars will be deadly for the WTO and for the world economy. We will be wasting valuable resources. So, apologies, it's just a little slow with the... So who needs the WTO? The answer to me is the people in this room. We need the WTO. The people who need it are people who want a rules-based global trading system, which is apparently not the United States and to some extent not China. It's those who suffer from unilateralism, whether it's things like tariffs or whether it's things like subsidies. It's developing countries like members of ASEAN, including Indonesia. And it's also middle powers such as Canada, Australia. These are Japan. Australia and Canada have been massively hit by unilateral actions on countries who will remain unnamed. So here's my view. Every person in this room, if I asked you to write down a list of all the problems that the WTO has, it would be, you could give me a list of at least 50 things immediately. In fact, you wouldn't even have to do that. You would just go to chatbot 3.5 and it would give you the answer to that and it would be accurate. We all get that there's problems with the WTO. My focus personally is to ask two questions. Tell me a problem that's important and that we can solve. We can't solve all of the WTO's problems. We haven't been able to solve very many of them, since 1987. So tell me a problem that's important and that we can solve. I want to offer you 7 of them today. Okay? So the first of those is that, because maybe I've been in a business school too long, it's important to distinguish what time horizons you want to think about solutions for. So the first thing is what is sometimes called intelligent litigation. It's very easy to do. We simply go to the WTO with a set of mutually agreed complaints about what, say, the United States is doing or what China is doing or what other countries are doing, the EU. And we launch a complaint and ask the WTO to clarify the rules, wherever those rules, because in many cases the rules are unclear. The most famous one being the definition of a public body. There are many parts of the WTO that are unclear. Let's see if we can get them cleared up. So let's get a group of countries to agree on what are the salient confusions we have with WTO trade law, and let's agree on a case that will help solve it. We could even, for example, if it's a public bodies case, we could even ask China to help us with the clarification. It does not have to be adversarial. Now, so that's an easy solution. Whether it will work, there are people who think that this will never work. People like Henry Gao at the Singapore University think this is a great idea. Other people, several American lawyers, question whether we'll ever get very far on that because WTO law is inherently confusing. But at least we should try. It's easy, and if we all cooperate, don't do this unilaterally, but in a group of countries, we should make at least a little bit of progress. We can the second thing, looking much longer, and that's why everyone is in this room, is that we need to keep working hard on WTO reform of governance. Okay, so the third one that I want to emphasize, subsidies is a huge problem in the WTO. This is getting worse and worse and worse. It's getting to the point where, we used to fight over $10 billion between Boeing and Airbus, that they were receiving subsidies of 10 billion. Now we're looking at subsidies of 100 billion. It's not like what it used to be. We are completely out of control at this point. So we need to create a subsidies database that documents subsidies used in China and elsewhere. I'm singling out China here because from the available data that we have, China's subsidies are 1.75% of its GDP. That is 3 times higher than the next highest country, South Korea. It's 4 times higher than the United States. So China has taken the subsidies to a level never envisioned by what is called never envisioned by the market-based views written into the law of the WTO. I think this is important. Building this database is huge because without knowledge of what is happening, we can't act on it. And WTO law requires that all countries notify on these subsidies. And in fact, MC12 emphasized that this has to happen. So we have agreement from MC12 that we need something like this database. We need to act on it. We need to know who is doing what. Once we have that data, the next thing that we need to do, I'm sorry, my clicker is a little bit quiet here, is we need to analyze that data. We can't just let it sit there passively. We need to know how these subsidies are affecting third-party countries like Australia, Canada, Indonesia, and many other ASEAN countries. And here's the kicker. We build the database, we start analyzing it. We know that with a membership-driven organization like the WTO, it will be stymied. From what I've seen happen, I won't name countries, but in the WTO, I've literally seen the most aggressive posturing saying the WTO is not there to think. They're there to do the bidding of the contracting parties. Well, how do we get around that? We need the data development and analysis to be delegated to a trusted and independent and capable body. Let's delegate this out of the WTO, out of the realm in which politics can interfere. The fifth one that we need, the fifth proposal is improved WTO working practices. I think this is extremely promising area. So if you look at what the WTO is currently doing, I feel like I'm between you and a lovely snack. So you should feel free to make me hungry by taking some munch now. So what we need to do is we need to add tools that will address these specific trade concerns in committee. Okay, so specific trade concerns meaning some country notifies that they're involved in that they are going to have a certain regulation, and then Australia comes along and says, well, we'd like some clarification on that. We have a specific trade concern. In committee, it's discussed. Say Canada has changed its regulations. Australia says, we don't like it for this reason. Canada says, oh, okay, maybe we didn't need to do it quite that way. We'll go back and redesign our regulations. That's a wonderful thing for the WTO to be doing. So where does it work currently? It works amazingly well in two committees, which is SPS and TBT. And those two committees have something that's unusual that you don't see in other sort of, in the remaining committees, which tend to be heavily driven by politicians and bureaucrats. These committees contain high levels of technical expertise, formal procedures, and high-quality databases. So we need to use that as a model for other committees. And to push it even further, there are some issues which are systemic, like how are we going to deal with subsidies to microchips? How are we going to deal with agricultural subsidies? These are systemic problems that are beyond just a specific trade concern. So we need these committees that to regularly use thematic sessions that are open to non-trade officials, so that it's not just in the political sphere, non-trade officials who have technical competence, who can actually speak to the issues and not speak past each other in political jargon. Okay? I would go and take it even further if we could, if the contracting members would agree. We see amazing agricultural subsidies work done by the OECD, but not by the WTO. Why is that? Because in the OECD, the Secretariat is powerful, can act beyond what is called for by the members. So we need to think about structurally empowering DG Ngozi so that she can pass on directives about this is what the WTO should be focusing on right now. We need power for DG Ngozi to say agricultural subsidies needs to be studied more. We're not going to let certain countries obstruct progress on this area anymore. Let's push for more power to the Secretariat. Okay, this to me is doable in increments. So I don't see this as happening tomorrow, but if we keep pushing this, adding more and more committees that operate in this way, I think we will have huge successes. And let me just watch the time. Yes. Just to give you an example, that's really small. You won't be able to see it. But on the, maybe my pointer will help. Over here is the Technical Barriers to Trade Committee. And here is the SPS Committee. So let's just focus on this. TBT has seen over its history 34,000 complaints. 34,000 complaints. Of those, 500 have become special trade concerns that get formal discussion, and only 6 of them have gone to panel. 34,000 complaints, 6 go to panel. It's telling me that the model for the WTO should be the one that it originally envisioned back in the days of its inception at the GATT, which is in the language of one of the founders of the GATT, Hudak, we need to move away from hard law and back to soft law. Or in the language that I prefer, we need to go back to our function as a marriage counselor. We need to be discussing issues, not fighting between 2 lawyers how to resolve the issues. That to me is the most doable way of making progress on WTO reform. It's low-hanging fruit, and as I told you, I'm interested in important problems that we can solve. This we can solve. The next one is plurilateral agreements. This one is, I don't know if, I think we can solve it, but it's going to take a bit of work. Open conditional plurilaterals within the WTO. That is to say, if there are coalitions of the willing who want to agree on a topic, say digital trade, agricultural subsidies, why should they not be able to discuss it within the ambit of the WTO? Well, the answer is because any country can veto any plurilateral proposal. So if Indonesia and China want to have an agreement on agricultural subsidies, Chile can veto it. We need to get rid of the veto and replace it with something which is a much harder thing to block. Okay, so what would, now the concern that should immediately pop to your mind is if we have plurilaterals, won't that take apart all of the WTO? The answer is no. First of all, it needs to be applied on a conditional MFN basis. That is to say, we as members, as contracting parties, we decide that we want this plurilateral. Now, anybody who wants to join this plurilateral comes in on an MFN basis. The terminology conditional MFN is a little bit confusing because conditional means so many different things in the WTO. But anybody is allowed to enter, and when they enter on an MFN basis. The second thing is we have to be open to subsequent accession by other members. Because you can imagine, for example, that many rich countries start a plurilateral, set the terms for it, and then everybody else is sort of left out. For instance, we could have an agreement which says between, say, Canada and the United States and Europe, say the Trilateral Commission, which says we want this solution for digital trade, and a condition for accession is you cannot be from a country that has a capital called Jakarta. Right? We need the accession to be very, very open-ended. The next thing is it has to be a plurilateral that's within the WTO. We don't want another court outside of the WTO. The plurilateral is not another agreement, yet another agreement outside the WTO. It's operating with the machinery of the WTO. Business needs that, and I think we need that. It needs a trade for aid aspect. Some of these plurilaterals will be dealing with issues which are not of immediate concern to developing countries. But we need those developing countries at the table so they understand the issues and can contribute constructively and also in their self-interest to make sure that the plurilateral is helping them and certainly not hindering them. And then finally, there needs to be a code of conduct about what we're going to allow a plurilateral to look like. We can't just have anything to be a plurilateral. I have a whole slide, which I can't go through today, saying, Dan Treffler's code of conduct for what should be allowed and what should not be allowed. And it's very circumscribed. Not everything can be a plurilateral. We have to be very specific about what is allowed and what isn't allowed. Otherwise, we're just going to sink the WTO. So an example, I was trying to think of examples this morning about what would work for Indonesia in a plurilateral. And I was thinking to myself, maybe this is pie in the sky, but let me throw it out there as a starting point. That we could think, the problem with SDTs, and Lili, here, I'm going to disagree with you because we've been working together for so long that I think arguing is a fun and healthy thing here. I'm not sure that the problem with SDTs, with special and differential treatment, is from a sort of a US obstructionist perspective. It's not really about who can be a member, who can claim this status. It's about the fact that even if you do have that status, it really doesn't confer any advantages to you, because no WTO panel rulings have ever really used the provisions of SDT to help developing countries. So we should move away from thinking about titles and start thinking about how do we strengthen it. Well, like imagine a plurilateral that's about agricultural subsidies. United States, Europe will never join, but they won't veto it either. Can we get to a point where countries like Indonesia are developing a plurilateral that starts to make the United States look very shamefaced? Here's a great idea to help humanity. America, where are you? Not joining is telling us that you don't care about humanity. So can we think about plurilaterals that cleanly bring together all of the careful thought that we've been having about agricultural subsidies, about public stocks, and use it as a fulcrum to get to grow that plurilateral, say from 50, I'm sure we could get 50 developing countries onto that plurilateral with no problem. Could we get it from 50 and then say, okay, Canada, okay, Australia, you should be sympathetic to this, sign on. And we just sort of chip away. Many other areas of interest to me, particularly, I'm very concerned about privacy and data ownership. Who owns Indonesian data? Should it be the Chinese? Should it be the Americans? I don't think so. Who should be able to monetize that data? Should it just be the United States and China? No, obviously no. Are you all familiar with Kai-Fu Lee's statements? Kai-Fu Lee was Google's CEO of China, who then went on to become China's most important VC. As opposed to like Jack Ma, who owns a company. Kai-Fu Lee was a venture capitalist, hugely successful, and he said, this is where the world is heading. All of the AI algorithms and the data that they gather are going to eventually be in the control of just two countries, the United States and China, and the rest of the world is going to be paying those two countries royalty over the next many decades. Two countries will benefit, the rest of us will pay for those benefits. So we need to start thinking about whether plurilaterals will help us to alleviate this problem. And I can guarantee you, from having negotiated, between Canada and the United States and watched the Google propaganda machine push against the interests of Canadian citizens, that this is a hard topic that we just can't lay down on, even if we're lacking expertise. Okay, oops. I'm not sure I am now. Okay, so I'm sorry, give me 1 minute here. Okay, so plurilaterals, we need to get rid of just one thing, and that is vetoing of plurilaterals, and then we can start moving into coalitions of the willing. Coalitions which may not include China or the United States when we start. Okay, appellate body reform. This is a crazy difficult topic. MC12 envisions that we're going to have this solved by 2024. Obviously, the people who agreed to that are great believers. I'm a little skeptical, and yet there is, I see as a solution. The appellate body problem is multidimensional, but we all know what's at the heart of it, and that is US obstructionism. There are many issues about appellate body reform that are valuable, but US obstructionism is at the core of why we can't move forward. What the US has done is it's confused two separate issues. First is judicial overreach, that the appellate body is creating new laws, new rights and obligations for contracting members. The second is precedence, that the appellate body is creating a body of precedents. I cannot understand what it means to say that that appellate body is creating precedents. That's just nonsense. Every time the US makes a submission, a panel submission, it says, oh, and because of DS 542, we have the right to the following concessions. The US, in short, is every time it makes a submission, it is appealing to precedents. So the US is confusing precedents with judicial overreach. The question is, can we break that and focus purely on judicial overreach? So there is a trade expert called Mark Bush who has a solution, and the solution reads like this. It's quite technical, and I wish that we could bring him in here and we could argue with him about the details of it. I have already, in the Canadian context, I've had him come into the Canadian trade negotiators, and we talked for hours about whether we could do this. Definitely, I think it's possible. So here's the solution. We allow for dissenting opinions in the AB rulings that trigger self-initiating reviews of potential AB judicial activism. Okay, that is a mouthful, but I'm trying to keep it short. So when there's an AB ruling and one of the appellate judges says, I have my doubts about the following piece. I don't like the way that we interpreted, let's do DS 542. That by itself, without any further decisions, just the fact that in that appellate body report, there was a judge who dissented, it immediately triggers a self-initiating review. No, we don't need any politicians. We don't need any further judges. The act of dissent is self-initiating for a review. It goes to a third body, which is a set of past appellate body judges. So we're not trying to create very much new architecture. We're trying to limit the amount of new architecture. They have to rule very, very quickly about whether there has been judicial activism in this case, and if so, they send it back to the appellate body. The important thing is it's self-initiating. Okay? So the Americans don't have to go back and say, oh, we hated that appellate body decision because it had judicial activism. The Americans don't have to do anything. As soon as there is that dissent, the WTO will take care of it by themselves. And we want to limit how new this is. We want to keep this initiative from adding too much more new structure to the WTO. So we're still keeping the panel AB duality. Yes, there's a little bit extra on the AB side, but we're still keeping fundamentally the way the court system works. And we're going to keep what is increasingly being used in panel decisions, this notion of cogent reasoning. And the idea here is that we now see panel rulings which say, we know that the appellate body had the following decision in one of their cases, like public body. But cogent ruling tells us that that is not coherent with the other pieces of AB decision making. So where we can show you there's cogent reasoning for why the appellate body's previous decision is no good, we can ignore past appellate body reasoning. So what we're doing then is saying there are times when we will ignore the appellate body past decisions, which are times are really incoherent. And we can do so using existing architecture, because cogent reasoning is already being applied in various panels. So nothing new here. We're looking for a solution which does not require an overhaul of the appellate body. It just requires two things: self-initiating reviews and the use of cogent reasoning to argue cases. This to me seems very, very doable. All right. I have just 1 minute left. I know that you wanted me to talk about subsidies. Subsidies is a very, very hard one. I will put up a very long list of what I think needs to be done. Do I think we can get there? This is very tough. And to me, the whole approach is likely to be a failure. As an economist, so much of what is happening with ASCM is let's rebuild the language of ASCM, that is to say, redefine what a subsidy is. But fundamentally, that may not be the full problem. The bigger problem is, even if you're found to violate an obligation, the remedies are so limited, it doesn't matter. So if China builds, for example, a shipbuilding industry that subsidizes workers, the Chinese subsidies on shipbuilding took it from 20% of world production of shipbuilding to 60% of world shipbuilding in 10 years. Massive subsidies. The calculations are it costs $1 million per job created. Massive subsidies. And then there's a complaint from South Korea saying, but that's an illegal subsidy. So China says, okay, we don't actually need the subsidy anymore. We dominate the world. Okay, we'll get rid of the subsidy. How is that a remedy for South Africa? I'm sorry, I apologize, for South Korea. The problem is not just the language of ASCM, the problem is that the remedies are completely inconsequential. So this is a difficult problem. I'm thinking about it hard, but since I'm far out of time,
Prof. Traveler, I think you can have 5 more minutes to discuss about Indonesia slide.
About this slide?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yes, please.
Okay. You never ask an academic to talk for longer than they're supposed to.
Because I saw your last slide is about Indonesia, so I'm eager to listen to that.
The Indonesia was really just putting together some random thoughts. So less this slide, you want to talk about Indonesia. Okay, you're putting me in my weakest part. This is not a great way to end a talk. So I was going to end it by who needs the WTO? We all do. Even the countries that have been creating problems with the WTO don't realize how much they need it. And I want to emphasize that perfection is the enemy of progress. Let's not get the WTO working exactly right. Let's just make some progress here. And let's focus on problems that can be solved first. That's how you negotiate. You negotiate the easiest problems first, and you look for goodwill built to generate momentum to solve the harder problems. I'm interested in focusing on problems that we can solve. Indonesia, I really do not know much about Indonesia, so there's a lot of embarrassment on my part here. We talked about, I'm having troubles reading the small letters there. So we've already talked about STT. That's comments that I already made before. On COVID, we know that the MC12 is very sort of hopeful that something can happen. I'm a little bit more skeptical because if you think that Indonesia is going to be making its own vaccines with US technology, we forget that technology, codified technology, such as it appears in patents, is only a small part of how you actually develop high-tech products. You need tacit knowledge, you need help and cooperation from big US and European multinationals to make progress there. So if you want to try to build those kinds of supply chains, I think we may be more successful out of the WTO than in the WTO. Things like the World Health Organization, the initiatives by people like Bill Gates, that might be the place to look for COVID solutions. Because I feel like the WTO is just a little bit too rigid to be able to get past this point. But and it's not just about COVID. This is about what's going to be the next pandemic. So we need to think hard about that architecture. And I'm inclined to think that it's going to have to happen outside of the WTO. The public stock, it's such a huge issue for developing countries, and it's anathema to a country like Canada who wants to export wheat all over the place, right? Canada doesn't have big agricultural subsidies, but we want it. This is what we're good at, selling food. Maybe this is the place, as I was mentioning, to start a plurilateral on the issue of public stock. And then eventually try to make Canadians see how this could be used to Canada's advantage. Fishing, I'm told that Indonesia does not anymore have as big of a fishing issue with international fishing in their waters, that's sort of been mitigated. So that is less of an issue now. E-commerce and digital services, everybody talks about it. The issues are not that hard. If you just read CTPPP, its chapters, this is not rocket science. This can be done. It's just that the WTO has difficulties making anything happen. But the language for what these agreements might look like, it's already in place. You can also look at the renegotiation of the Canada-US-Mexico agreement. You'll see lots and lots of language. If there's some language which you should be offended about, and I'd be very happy to point out which parts you should avoid. But this is not so hard. And why we've been unable to get there is because the US really wants to protect its intellectual property right. And then I think that's pretty much it. My own view of what I've seen of nickel exports, the nickel exports issue, if I was a country that had 37% of the world market share, I'd want to use my market power. I just want to be very, very cautious that in using my market power, I'm actually advancing national interests and not private interests. That we really are creating value here in Indonesia, not empowering just a few rich people. I don't know Indonesian domestic politics well enough to tell you how to make that work, but as I tell my students, the key thing is transparency. The public needs to know exactly what contracts are being written to create value added here, so that private interests are not stealing public money. That would be my caution. And then finally on palm oil, it looks like from everything I'm reading that the EU is going to lose its case. So it doesn't seem like a big issue. Let me finish up. Oops, have I? Okay, I'll just leave it here. I just want to emphasize, we need the WTO. Let's not abandon the WTO. For most countries in the world, we are not big. A small number of very big countries are using their size to push their agenda in ways which are undermining a rules-based international trading order. For the vast majority of the planet, we are being pushed around. And the way to stop being pushed around is to unify around an international organization. And right now, unless you're big on Star Trek and you believe that the Federation is around the corner, the WTO is our next best option. Let's work towards improving the WTO. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Traveler. I think it's very difficult to. It's a very difficult topic, travel, but you deliver it straightforward. You don't beat around the bush with 7 solutions for the WTO reform. If I may highlight some important insight from your lecture, that we know tariff is bad, but subsidy is worse. Right? We know it from the first semester of our study, right? And it's true now in the WTO, right? And then we need a subsidy, and that's why we need subsidy database and analyze it and show the impact of the subsidy. And with that, we can strengthen the committee within the WTO. And then the plurilateral initiative should not be perceived as a threat, but rather it can be a modalities. It can be starting point to grow to like a snowball into the multilateral, and it can be useful for the emerging and developing countries, right? So yes, with that, now I would like to invite our second speaker, Dr. Lee Quang Lan. Dr. Lan is a director of Market Integration Directorate, ASEAN Secretariat. Dr. Lan earned a doctorate degree in economics from the National Trade Institute in Vietnam in 2003. Dr. Lan has a long professional career as a trade negotiator for Vietnam, including the Director General Deputy Permanent Representative of Vietnam to the World Trade Organization from 2012 to 2015, and the SEOM-led of Vietnam in ASEAN from 2008 to 2010. He also served as a Deputy Director General of the National Competition Commission from 2018 to 2019. He first joined the ASEAN Secretariat in 2015, and in 2021 he was promoted to Director of the Market Integration Directorate, or MID, of ASEAN, which tasks including overseeing several divisions working towards accomplishing the goals of the ASEAN Economic Community. Dr. Lan, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ravindo, and also good morning to our panelists, Professor Daniel and Dr. Lili, and also good morning to everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Ministry of Trade, ARIA, and University of Indonesia has organized this event, and I'm very happy to be here back to the WTO issues where I came from. I had the opportunity to work for the WTO in a number of capacity, and but today is very special. We talk about the WTO reform, which is very very interesting and also very timely topic, as this organization has already encountered many challenges that potentially undermine its credibility and its relevance, effectiveness to the ongoing and challenging global economic landscape, especially after the pandemic. I think it really timely for us to reflect and exchange our view. We know that WTO reform has been a top topic in Geneva, and I'm sure that this conversation would somehow contribute to that. So today I take part in this discussion is not from the perspective of the WTO members, but I want to share from the perspective of ASEAN, which is a regional grouping and one of the largest economic and also trading bloc in the world, and as well as one of the most dynamic economic region in the world. Now, I know that probably my colleague from the Australian Embassy said that what is the relations between ASEAN and WTO? I think that is a very fundamental question, and I think that I need to clarify. We are very close, but also very far. we are very close because ASEAN, we adhere to all WTO principles, rules and regulations. But we far because we don't really touch upon the WTO issues in our day-to-day topic or agenda of discussion. So somehow we focus on the regional work while WTO is moving on its own track. But now it is good to bring both process together. And then that is why I'm here to share some about my view on that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, that WTO actually provide a fundamental rules and mechanism to ensure an open, a fair, transparent, predictable, and rules-based global trading system. Of course, ASEAN is a part of the trading system. And all ASEAN agreement, including all the ASEAN plus FTA between ASEAN and dialogue partners, are all fully compatible with the WTO. And that is because we are justified under the article. I'm talking a little bit about from the legal perspective. Our activity, our cooperation in the regional are fully justified under the Article 24 of the GATT and the WTO, and also the enabling clause of this of the GATT. So the WTO commitments of each and every ASEAN member country, and including our dialogue partners, are the baseline for our progress in the negotiation. So, like it or not, WTO reform would actually impact the ASEAN economic integration, and that is where I come from. So I come back to actually to the question that correctly raised by our professors, Daniel, is that why WTO is matter? Why WTO reform matter? So since the establishment of the WTO in 1995, almost 30 years ago, the WTO has been playing a very central role, at least in the first phase of the after the entry, after the establishment. It advocates the fair and open and free trade through a subsequent negotiations process. But nevertheless, we all acknowledge that the organization glory is now fading. As the house of trade, after a decade of negotiation impasse, and you refer correctly the Doha development agenda or Doha development round. Actually, it's a failure. It's a failure of WTO. It's the first round, and also it's the first failure that the WTO. So we know the issue and why that issue has happened. Because the global economic landscape has been evolving significantly, and the rise of protectionism in many forms, the inward-looking policy and measures have been adopted in the world, and the rise and we all know that that rise of protectionism in combination with the increasing trade war among a major power in the WTO and global and currently we also encounter or face a new geopolitical tension that have threatened the stability of the global trade and put the whole WTO system at risk of failure. So there are and in addition to that, I pointed out by Professor Daniel that the rapidly changing of international trade, such as sustainable development. I think the need to have a sustainable development, the digital transformation, the investment environment, and we require a new set of rules to protect the investment, and also the intellectual property right. Actually, it really give a new landscape for the digital for the for the whole trade and economic system. Now, so I want to that is why the WTO reform is really something significant in order to make the global trading system it more effective and more benefit to everyone. Now, so how ASEAN should contribute to that process? I just want to come back to the perspective that I raised earlier, that as a supporter of the global and open trading system, ASEAN has a lot of stake in this exercise, and would be the ASEAN interest to closely monitor and contribute to that process. Now, allow me to share some of the points. Now, first, as one of the largest global trading partners in the world, ASEAN could help bridge the different group of interests in the WTO, particularly between the developing country and developed countries. The ASEAN is projected to become the fourth largest economic power by 2030, and we bear our big responsibility. ASEAN as the whole, as the group, as the community, we bear a big responsibility to pursue for a more inclusive and balanced WTO reform that reflect a fair and equivalent benefit to all, especially developed and less developed countries. So over the last several years, we all know that some of ASEAN member countries are very active in the WTO to contribute to this process. We know that Vietnam and Thailand or Malaysia and Singapore actually have submitted a number of recommendations. I'm not sure whether those recommendations are very much linked to your or not, but we know that we have a lot of recommendations to the General Council on how to promote, how to reform this organization. And some of our ASEAN countries like Singapore or Thailand and Malaysia, we actually play a big role in some key initiatives to move the process of negotiation forward in the e-commerce, in the sustainable development discussion, and so on. So ASEAN should be further collaborate, actually to be more organized, more unified in the WTO reform dialogue. And also we need to consider the very unique nature of the ASEAN, because our member states are very diverse. There are least developed countries, developing countries, and also developed partners in ASEAN. So ASEAN can be a good mediator because we know exactly how the benefits lie within a different group of interests. Now, the second thing that ASEAN could do better that we, one of the most dynamic region in the world, and like I said earlier, that no matter what happening in WTO, ASEAN have our own agenda, and we have a very dynamic, very progressive agenda. We talk about e-commerce. We even talk about digital economy. We are now focusing on sustainability, one of the key deliverables that Indonesia chairmanship has identified. So we have a lot of things to share. So, and despite a lot of slow progress in the WTO negotiation, ASEAN has consistently deepened our regional cooperation, so that trade facilitation and service. I mentioned you earlier that there are a number of areas under the ASEAN Economic Community blueprint that need to be realized by the year 2025. So we have a lot of lessons to share. Now, even in the darkest day of the pandemic, ASEAN thinking about the bright futures post-pandemic. We are talking about the digital economy and how to make ASEAN more resilient and how to make ASEAN more sustainable. And that is, I think, a good background that ASEAN can share to the WTO. So I'm very happy to say that ASEAN eventually can be a big contributor, to the WTO reform eventually. Now, and then and some of you may be also aware that why many WTO members turn their back to the trade liberalization and move forward to inward looking. ASEAN do a different way. We pursue different paths. We pursue even conclude and put the implementation, the entry into force of one of the biggest free trade area in the world. Not one of, but it's the biggest free trading area in the world. That is the Regional Economic Partnership Agreement, ASEP. And the ASEP agreement is a very comprehensive one. It covers a lot of things ranging from trade liberalization, market asset investment, to e-commerce and IPR and so on. So for the last several years, ASEAN has been very active in this, and we are continue to do so. We had initiated the FTA upgrade negotiation with our existing partner, with Australia and New Zealand, one of our key initiative, and we hope that we can complete the negotiation by this year. We are also pursuing the similar upgrade negotiation with China, with India, and now we are thinking about promoting a digital economy and cooperation with EU, with Korea. So ASEAN is very much in advanced in many areas, and we can share. Now the third one is really about that ASEAN can play a big role in promoting cooperation and trade and investment with the WTO members and other organizations. And this is a potential major contribution of ASEAN into the WTO discussion, WTO reform discussion. The WTO needs the active role of ASEAN as the unified position, like the single voice in Geneva. And then I think ASEAN can do it even better. So I think probably I want to talk a little bit about how ASEAN also can benefit. We can contribute, but we also benefit from that. And how we can do that. I think the first thing ASEAN can do is that we need, in order to contribute to this organization, we first need to be a good player in this organization. I think that is the most practical benefit and also contributor to this organization. So promoting a transparency, good governance, and the rule-based rule of law, trade-related matters among ASEAN member states are crucial. So of course that these principles are upheld by the WTO as well as the ASEAN. And ASEAN could maximize our benefit from WTO reform by promoting the ASEAN collective strategy to enhance the global competitiveness and try to participate in the global economy and the supply chain, in global supply chain. And then in practices, this has been arranged through a number of our commitment in ASEAN member states in our FTA. And that is why we want to be the active trading partner and want to be a good player in the supply chain, in the global supply chain. So that is a big benefit that we can gain from the WTO reform. We also believe that we can benefit from participating actively in the negotiation in the WTO reform, because we know that restoring a full function and effective WTO organization is the key. And we know that the WTO, even though it still encounter a lot of problems, but it doesn't mean that WTO cannot make good progress. And then the FTA in 2013 and 14 under the Indonesian host the MC10, right? And then we successfully secured the trade facilitation agreement. And last year, we also, WTO can also secure the agreement on fishery subsidy. So it means that WTO can continue making progress. And then ASEAN, we really think that we can actively participate in the negotiation of the WTO in order to advance the agenda in the multilateral trading system. And thirdly, that we also believe that aligned ASEAN economic integration agenda with the WTO reform, it should be a mutually benefit to both. So WTO is being reformed, and ASEAN is also embarking on the process of developing our post-2025 regional agenda. We need to try to bring it together, that to make it more correlated, more harmonized. And this process can go at the same time, and this would be a good opportunity for ASEAN to maximize our regional agenda in a more global forum. So I just want to stop my remark at this point, because I'm sure that this discussion is very essential. I'm very happy that Indonesia ambassador on the screen, who may also share the view and share your thought in this conversation, and that is how ASEAN can help and can bring our perspective to support for the ASEAN group in Geneva in many areas. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lan. Personally, I really like your take, Dr. Lan. It's very optimistic, and there's some. Allow me to highlight some important points from your lecture. First is that ASEAN agenda is very much in line with WTO, right? And share the same spirit. And the second one is that ASEAN has been showing its commitment for soft and open regionalism. Correct, Dr. Lan? Because ASEAN from the beginning realized that we need external resource, we need external capital and technology, so we adopt open and soft regionalism. And ASEAN believes that it can bridge competing interests in the WTO between developed and developing countries. But of course, ASEAN should act more organized and more unified. And ASEAN show some good example and lesson from e-commerce, digital economy, and sustainability and trade facilitation. It can be a good lesson and example for the rest of WTO member states. Allow me to move on to next speakers. Now I would like to invite His Excellency Bapak Dandi Satria Iswara, Deputy to Permanent Representative or Ambassador, Permanent Mission of the Republic of Indonesia to the United Nations, WTO, and other international organizations in Geneva, Switzerland. Pak Dandi earned his master's and bachelor degree in international relations from Parahyangan University in Bandung. He has been serving to the Ministry of Trade, the Republic of Indonesia, for almost 20 years, right, Pak Dandi? And holding various important positions, including Trade Attaché, Director of Indonesia Trade Promotion Center, and Director of Multilateral Negotiation. Pak Dandi, it's all yours.
Thank you so much for the music. I like the sound. Feels like we are entering into a good, bright future, and it's a good thing. So first of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity here to participate in this very timely event. Very good morning, Bapak Kasan, Head of our Trade Policy Agency. Ibu Lili, it's been a while. The Lead Advisor ERIA, esteemed moderators, Bapak Muhammad Dian, the speakers, key panelists before me, Professor Treffler and Dr. Lan from ASEAN, and other contributors and also participants. I believe that this discussion is very important, and this is important for shaping the kind of reform that is needed in WTO. As we all aware, in June 2022, the minister at MC12 have agreed to undertake the comprehensive review of the WTO's function in order to ensure the capability of WTO in responding the challenges facing the multilateral trading system. So following up the MC12 outcome, WTO members have also agreed to hold the next Ministerial Conference, the 13th Ministerial Conference, next year, next February. We have 1 year from now in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates. So therefore, again, I hope this Trade-PAG event today can contribute to prepare the upcoming MC13, particularly one that serves the interests of developing members and LDCs. So let me start with the first slide. Next, okay. And before previous slide, I believe Professor Teffler, which mentioned about coffee. So believe me, this is my second glass of coffee, a lot of coffee. It's almost 5 here in Geneva. Dr. Teffler touched upon WTO reform from different perspectives, the bird's eye views on the issues, while I believe Dr. Lan focused more on ASEAN point of view on the reform. So my presentation in this, I hope that I can complete and may intersect with both speakers. Specifically, my presentation will focus on 3 key issues. What is WTO reform and why is it necessary? Where are we now and how the future discussion should be shaped and what is Indonesia's role in it? So next slide, please. First of all, what is WTO reform and why is it necessary? To understand the issues, we need to know about the history just a little bit. So allow me to take the outline of the evolution of WTO reform. As you can see in the slide, since the Uruguay round in 1986, it started the imbalance in the development issues where policy space in industrial development of developing members have been reduced. And at the same time, tariff of many agriculture subsidies are increased. The next timeline, which is important, is in Doha round, where Doha Development Agenda had established implementation issues and a stronger and more effective special and differential treatment. This is the biggest reform agenda agreed by all WTO members, in my opinion, although the negotiation afterwards in 2008 create a deadlock where many members want to ensure that mandated issues are addressed, while other members want to engage in a new agenda. And next, in 2013, another timeline can be seen in Bali Ministerial Conference. Several outcomes of MC9 in Bali, such as trade facilitation agreement and the public stock holding for food security proposals, or PSH. This outcome shows as both sides are compromising for a deal. Developing and LDCs member give flexibilities in SDT, while developed members agree in PSH. The highlight of the need for WTO reform is the appellate body impasse in 2019. I think Ibu Lili mentioned this before. Since December 2009, the appellate body could no longer conduct a new appeals due to the blockage of a key member. Consequently, this WTO members has hampered the appointment of the appellate body. As a result, there are now, up until now, 30 disputes cases being appealed into the void because the AB is not operational. The latest progress in WTO reform is that June last year, the MC12 outcome document, or document WT24, was agreed by members in reforming WTO. Was agreed by as highlighted in paragraph 2, paragraph 3 and 4, where in paragraph 2 is stated reaffirming the provisions of SDT for developing country member and LDCs. And in paragraph 3 is on the overall reform on all functions with development in the center of cost-cutting issues. And in paragraph 4, it stated having a fully and well-functioning dispute settlement system accessibly to all members by 2024. Seeing from the timeline on the screen, it does shows that WTO reform is what we call as old as the establishment of the WTO itself. It is an old debate that need to answer all issues and reflect on new realities. Next slide, please. So on this slide, let me elaborate on several aspects of why WTO reform is necessary. There are various reasons why the reform is still necessary. Excuse me. First, over 3/4 of 164 WTO members are developing or LDCs, and most members that are in the process of accession belongs to the third category of developing countries. So it is fair to say that WTO majority members need development issues to be resolved. As such, it is important for WTO to provide needs and interests of these members, including to ensure that they will benefit from the implementation of SNDT provisions. Second, as reported by UNCTAD, contrary the predictions that developing countries will catch up to the developed countries, the economic and development divide in reality has widened over the years. The path for developing countries to move up and graduate in becoming developed country is more challenging. So it needs more policy space in developing countries to pursue upgrading the development and the industrialize. Third, new and emerging challenges in the recent years, such as COVID-19 and conflict and crisis and others, require policy tools that allow members enough policy space for maneuvers and flexibilities, and also at the same time restrain or avoid protectionism. And the last and the most important aspect in the dysfunction of one pillar, the dispute settlement mechanism. These conditions, the dysfunction of the two-tier system, will lead to uncertainty and unpredictability of the multilateral trading system. This is a strong need to resolve, and again, the important reasons why the reform is necessary. So next slide, please. So on this slide, let me start by giving a little description on where are we now in the WTO reform. In terms of issues that are being discussed under the umbrella of WTO reform and the divergence position between members, particularly developed members and developing members. So the following comparison can give a better understanding on the ongoing negotiation between developed and developing members in three functions of the WTO, which are negotiations, monitoring transparency, and dispute settlement. The complexities of the WTO reform stems from the fact that it is caused not only by the tug of war, the dialogue of interest between developed and developing countries, but also within some grouping within the developing countries and within LDCs. For example, ASEAN member states may have different positions and views on the transparency issues, views on dispute settlement issues. And also in the American region, member states have different positions on dispute settlement. So on the next couple of slides, I will try to provide a general overview on the dynamics of the three functions of the WTO. Aside, each members have their own national positions and views on the issues. Next. So as you can see here, on the left screen is the position and views of developed members, and on the right side is the position and views of the developing and LDCs. It shows quite a gap on each side, seeing the issues as their priority on the negotiations. Like in SNDT, developed members view SNDT has to be conducted in a case-by-case basis, where flexibilities for developing members and LDCs are offered in the form of non-binding as well as clear of grace period of time. While on the other side, the developing and LDCs member views is preserving and strengthening SNDT no in categorizing member. It is up to the member to decide whether or not they shall benefit the SNDT flexibilities. Next, and on the next slide is on the monitoring and transparency. The different views of developed members and developing LDCs members can be identified. You can see the developed members' views on the importance of member obligations and enhancing the mechanism of transparency and monitoring, while developing an LDC's positions in opposing narrative based on the obstacles by members developing countries and LDCs oppose this narrative on the ground that the main obstacle is the capacity and that the proposal submitted by developed countries giving more burdensome to have transparency on the notifications. So this is the two sides of the story, the two sides of the coins that is happening in the negotiations regarding monitoring and transparency. Next. As one of the important function of the WTO is the dispute settlement. So most members agree that restoration of a fully functioning dispute settlement system is a top priority for ensuring the predictability and security of multilateral trading system, except for one key developed member. So many efforts have been made to start the selection process for AB members, which is supported by 127 WTO members, including Indonesia, in parallel with the efforts to restore the dispute settlement system. But however, this effort is currently being blocked. We do know, probably some of you knows, that recently there's a US-led informal discussion in dispute settlement reform. This informal discussion will move on into another phase that is going to be more inclusive and member-led process. So most members expected that this process will eventually lead to text-based negotiations. Next. So this the most recent development in WTO reform is the discussion of informal meeting on WTO reform focused on development. It was held in Geneva 2 weeks ago, February 2nd and 3rd. The meeting became the platform for WTO members to discuss cost-cutting aspects of the development dimension in the context of international trade, as well as propose possible solution to overcome the current deadlock. During the meeting, there was a strong call from developing members and LDCs that WTO should address numerous issues concerning the mandated issues on development that remain unfilled since Doha Development Agenda round. And in this informal meeting 2 weeks ago, Indonesia mentioned that the lack of fulfilling the mandated issues on development could have serious consequences for all members, suggesting that the failure to address development issues in agriculture, to address development issues in the fishery subsidies negotiations, and development issues in the moratorium on custom duties on electronic transmissions. So this failure to address development issues could have a domino effect. It means that if one member weakening in the development, it will affect other members. The weakening of demand in one member will affect the supply in other members. So the ideas of development issues is about all members go together and go stronger. That's the point that we raised in that event 2 weeks ago. Next. Last but not least is how the future discussion should be shaped and what is Indonesia's role in it. With growing number of developing countries joining the WTO, the future discussion should be led by these members, or at minimum, the discussion should address the interests of developing members and LDCs. Furthermore, leadership cannot come from large trading power alone. it's important to safeguarding the WTO is particularly important for smaller trading countries. It's just because the multilateral trading system offers them the opportunity to influence the development of new trade rules. And you can see smaller countries have played a role in strengthening trade cooperation in the past. So, and for Indonesia, in this WTO reform, our position and view reflect as developing members, which has a lot of credibility to take the lead in the discussions. Indonesia as member of G20, especially a member has, Indonesia is a member has successfully hosted G20 last year. This reflects how Indonesia playing important roles. Another credibility is Indonesia as one of ASEAN founding partners and now current chair for the ASEAN. So in WTO, Indonesia is G33 coordinator. And of course, G33 playing important role as a group with the main objective of on the issues of PSH and SSM. So, and this shows how Indonesia is one of the few effective player in WTO. This is why we need to keep move forward in all negotiations. It's very important for all members that Indonesia believe to eliminate the trust deficit that is happening within the members of WTO in the negotiations. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide. I hope my time is enough for this. So moving forward, I would like to suggest 3 recommendations in order to enhance Indonesia's role and participation in the discussion of WTO reform in the future. One, we need to identify our offensive and defensive issues and how to overcome impasse. This practice will be helpful in examining where and when we can make consensus. And if no one yield the position, how to safeguard against any damage and danger. And 2, we need to identify specific WTO rules that hamper the implementation of policies that would support economic growth, which WTO rules and agreements that give support Indonesia in its economic growth, and which are give challenges. This is important because such policies that Indonesia established in the name of economic growth is a strong, sustainable, and for a long period of time. The last recommendation is the involvement of capital-based delegation in the negotiations, whether in person, whether or online format. This is important to understand more on the nuance and context of each issues. By keeping up the negotiation process, keeping up the argument and the discussions, stay related with the issues. So it gives Indonesia delegation ability to formulate and convey positions accordingly. So with regard to the implementation of such proposal, particularly for the this could lead that Indonesia could submit a concrete proposal to inform the discussion about issues that are of the interest of Indonesia, or an internal paper to guide the negotiation in Geneva. And also the first and second recommendation is for our domestic. This could lead in creating strong law and regulation of national economy, and still in line with Indonesia's commitment in WTO. In doing so, the involvement, another important part is the involvement of Indonesia think tank or academia is important, such as involvement by the ITAPS, ERIA, Center for World Trade Studies, Gajah Mada University, and others. The involvement of academia is important in providing more substantive and data-based input, because it's very important that the negotiator of the WTO have a strong arsenal, a base is providing data evidence base for the negotiations. So last but not least, I would also like to underline that clock towards the preparation of forthcoming MC13 is keep ticking. And the year of 2023 will be very crucial for us. Therefore, it's also important to increase the cooperation, the coordination, synergy among relevant stakeholders, as well as prepare a timeline to ensure that Indonesia can have stronger positions in the negotiation. With that, I will end my presentation. I'm looking forward to the discussion session. Right.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Dandi. Let's give a round of applause. Pak Dandi, it's always very interesting to hear from a person who has first-hand experience in day-to-day activity of the WTO trade negotiations, and I would like to use these invaluable opportunities for comments and questions from the audience. I would like to give the first opportunity for audience in this room. Please raise your hand and let us know your affiliation and names. Yes, Pak Nur, and Pak Kasan. Okay, let's start from Pak Nur.
Yang kami hormati Pak Dr. Kasan, Kepala BKPerdag, Bapak Staf Sus, Bapak dan Ibu. Ladies and gentlemen, I think I would like to address some of the presentation previously. We believe that WTO reform has three main, I would say, discussions. And point number one would be on the problem of transparency and also monitoring, which it actually indicates, at least there are some numbers that the WTO Secretariat has indicated that notifications of certain regulations from particular members are not that very much encouraged. Point number two, it would be, I think, Professor has elaborated quite eloquently on the parts of the dispute settlement. We do believe that we are in the phase of not having the appellate body in place. Or if I may quote, Bernard Hoekman would call it as defunct, or in other words, that would be void or appeal into the void. We do not have any extensions of the future, how it might be. Now, the third part would be the negotiation when we should address the problem of plurilateralism that emerges in the multilateralistic process. These three things are becoming very, very extensive in the discussion of the WTO. I think my ambassador, His Excellency Dandi Iswara, elaborate quite clearly on the extension of the negotiation under the WTO. For transparency, the negotiations or the debates is always about whether a member could actually be punished if they are not fulfilling their obligation of transparency. And for another member, that would indicate the vulnerability of their capabilities of their domestic economy or their domestic capacity. So they would say that, okay, let's not punish, but make capacity building so that they would be able to fulfill their obligation. So that's the debate on the transparency part. Now, the debate on the dispute settlement part would be whether we are actually approaching on the adjudication part versus we want to build on the negotiation part as a dispute settlement. Now, this is the problem of the US. Oh, sorry this is the problem of one of the members of the WTO. Correct me if I'm wrong for politically incorrect, Pak Dubes. Basically, one of the members of the WTO think that we are no longer consistent or we are no longer efficient if we are using the two-tier system, which in this case, it would appear to be that by bringing into a certain level of appeal, it would indicate inefficiency to the process of the dispute settlement itself. And I do remember Ambassador Tai told me when we were discussing in Bali, he told me that either they want to move forward, but obviously the position of the US is not moving forward. So they will maintain the suggestions of this one-tier system in their context. I don't know, this is, again, maybe later on I will a little bit elaborate on how the extensions of the US geopolitical strategy in terms of endorsing their interest. And on the negotiation part, on the multilateralism, is always an issue. I think you have raised a great part at how a member could veto what is actually being agreed under a certain effort of critical mass of multilateral mechanism. It's always that approach. It's always that things. And it's a very rare for a country to actually believe that they are willing to actually bound themselves to a particular plurilateralistic that may decrease their sovereignty. So this is also becoming a problem. It's a very interesting to have that innovation from Prime Minister Daniel previously about cogent reasonings and everything. But when a country or a member of the WTO is insisting on putting up a system of one-tier system in the WTO and believing that the Article 9 of the Marrakesh Agreements allows the members to interpret the WTO agreement instead of a particular bodies under the dispute settlement mechanism interpret the agreement itself, it would be very, very difficult for other members to actually accept, because appeal is in fact a very legalistic, logical point of view that if a decision is made, it is not a perfect decision, then it has to be reviewed. So these debates happens. Now, what I'm willing to explore in this, and maybe to have your opinion, both of our speakers and also by Dundee as the ambassador, how we can manage to find a good landing zone for both sides. Those who believe that the two-tier system could actually provide a better dispute settlement for those who have dispute, and how can we actually provide the one-tier system to actually feel comfortable with the systems. I do believe that all the reasoning that there are an extensive, overreaching appellate body review could be perceived as a pretext of the US to actually, as a pretext of one of the WTO members to actually stall the process of forming the appellate body. But they do have a self-interest outside there. They are built, for example, the narrative of America first, the narrative of building labor into their US labor first, those sort of things basically are becoming the geopolitics strategy of the US. Point number two, I would like to also raise another beautiful movement in the Asia-Pacific condition right now. There's a growing initiation of IPAF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Now, what is in the Indo-Pacific? Any country who are willing to engage with someone else, another country, what is the main reason? It's always about market access, isn't it? You are willing to trade with someone, that is why you are engaged with them. But one of the things that distinct under the IPAF is the non-willingness of the US to discard market access. So all they want to build is norms, gender, they want to talk about environment, they want to talk about labor, they want to talk about agriculture, they want to talk about anything outside market access. So basically, I try to perceive this into a more geopolitical process where there are some interests driven behind the ABD fund from a particular member of the WTO. I would like to seek your opinion for that. Thank you. Anyway, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Nur Rahman Stiyoko. I'm Director of WTO Negotiation. Thank you.
Oh yeah, thank you, Pak Nur. I think Pak Kasan would also like to ask some question.
Ya, makasih Pak Revindo. Prof. Daniel, I think I love your statement on the slide. The perfection is the enemy of the progress. I love that, the statement. And I think this is the situation that the WTO is facing until now. As Dr. Lan mentioned about this progress in WTO, since Doha Development Agenda, no commitment, no progress for this multilateral trading system body. You recommend and you suggest that plurilateral agreements is one of the solutions for this WTO reforms. So I asked about these principles in WTO for decision making. It is about the single undertaking. Is it still relevant for these recommendations? I know that plurilateral agreement, for example, for Indonesia, maybe about the government procurement, for example. I know we have the constraints with this plurilateral agreement. When Indonesia cannot access to export to the US for medical equipment. Indonesia has competitiveness for these products. But because US require, including this regulation in the US, countries who has the plurilateral agreement on government procurement have access to export for medical equipment to the US. But Indonesia is not part of this plurilateral agreement. So I think Indonesia want to get the benefit from this WTO, but also we have constraint, we have problem. When Indonesia has the competitiveness of the product, then we have the constraint on the access. This is just one example. As far as I know, when our minister, Mr. Rahmat Gobel, come to the minister of it as a minister, then last 2 months before he become the minister, he sent the letters as a chairman of Electronic Association to the ministry. I read this letter because many years his company export medical equipment to Japan, but Japan companies said, when Indonesia can export directly to the US, because this product very competitive. And Japanese companies said, only Indonesia has the agreement on plurilateral agreement like a government procurement, you can export directly to the US. Because other regulation from the US, impossible for Indonesia to fulfill this regulation. For example, other regulation or other requirements from the US is, if that countries is member of Caribbean countries. Indonesia is not Caribbean countries. Only want this regulation from the US to make sure that this opportunity of Indonesia export to the US for medical equipment is very big, because government hospital in the US is needed this product. So this is example of our knowledge about this WTO regulation, WTO agreement, what the developing countries like Indonesia can this benefit. And the second point what I want to discuss is also Indonesia benefit, I think, from trade remedies. Trade remedies. We imposed anti-dumping, we imposed safeguards to protect or to manage our domestic industry. But we don't have experience. We don't have experience to impose anti-subsidy measures. In this case, Indonesia as a developing countries, we need the knowledge. We need the knowledge from developed countries, especially from the US, Australia, the EU, who has the many experience on subsidy. And this is very important for us, because subsidies agreement on WTO, as you mentioned, Pak Dubes also mentioned, and Dr. Lan also mentioned. So this is gives the benefit for certain countries, but many developing countries cannot compete with the subsidies products. Let's see, China went to become the WTO members in 2001. After that, the international trade of China increased very dramatically. Until now, China is #1 exporter in the world. China also the second largest economy in the world. But as Ibu Lili mentioned, when US proposed about reform on special and differential treatment based on the contribution of the trade or export in the world, China should be changed from developing countries to non-developing countries. This is also one issue proposed by developed countries to change the S&D treatment. And also, like Bu Lili mentioned, also I know very clear, Singapore, South Korea, based on the IMF or the World Bank criteria, those countries is developed countries. But because by self-declaration by each countries, these countries still developing countries status in WTO, not under the IMF or World Bank. So I think this is some case. I know about this WTO situation. And the last point that I want to share is, in WTO, increase many policy or many issues to be included, regulate under the WTO. Or we call it many new issues to include in WTO. When WTO cannot solve this problem about reform, about the agreement since the Doha Development Agenda, so many problem in the future, and there is no solution for the last agreement. So this is my opinion for this the WTO reform. So why I eager to come this point, because day by day I am talking about the price of staple food every day. So this is like from the earth to the sky. Earth mean I talking about the price of sugar or cooking oil and others. But this WTO issues, I think this is the sky issues that I have to join to discuss on this event. Thank you, Pak Repindo.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Kasan. I would like to invite response from our speakers, and Prof. Trevor, you can address the comments, the question. Well, you also have, you may ask question to another speaker if you like. Please, yeah. Please, Professor. You start from Professor Trevor.
Again, you never want to give the mic to an academic, but let me start with a question. I'm very, very sympathetic to what you're raising, and this is a discussion that could help my understanding of how to move forward. So I hope that after we'll have a chance to talk outside. But I need to start with a question for His Excellency the Ambassador Pak Dandi. Can you please help me just to understand, what does capital-based delegation mean?
Yeah.
So if I can respond to that, capital-based delegation that coming from Jakarta to Geneva. That's the simple terms on that.
I see. Capital.
It's a delegation coming from the capital. Delegations in the missions. So it's delegations type.
Thank you very, very much for that. I hope, given that I'm going to be a little bit more involved with the WTO than I have in my academic past, I hope that we will have the opportunity to meet perhaps in Geneva and to discuss some of these issues. That would be tremendously helpful for me, and I do hope we get that opportunity. There are a lot of really interesting questions. I'll be very brief on some of them, and on others acknowledge that I don't have a solution. First, on single undertaking, it's a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea, and let me tell you how why it feeds into the way I'm thinking about WTO reform now. If I were in if I was in McKinsey to talk about organizational change, right? We can, organizations that are in terrible shape and about to go bankrupt, those are the easiest organizations to change. The hardest organizations to change are ones that are struggling along. They're doing okay. They're disappointing investors, but they're not going bankrupt. That's the WTO today. Those are the hardest organizations to change. Organizational change requires, and you got a hint of it in my first slide, requires setting out timelines for different objectives. You don't start by saying, we're going to end up at a single undertaking that's going to solve all our problems. You say, they say MC12, by 2024, we want to meet this goal of AB reform. I would love to see, and you need interim successes if you're going to carry over the momentum to the larger and harder things. So you start with the easiest, have a win at the easiest, and you keep moving down the list. That's how you do organizational change anywhere else in the business world. I do not see, you just don't get a sense in the WTO that they have things that are called firm dates, firm deliverables. So that's a problem for the WTO. The worst of that is single undertaking. It's a complete mess and is, if you ask me what's the single biggest problem with the WTO, membership-driven single undertakings. Those two together, it's got nothing to do with China, it's got nothing to do with the US, it is fundamentally hardwired into the WTO. It has to change. The Secretariat has to become more powerful in driving initiative. You mentioned market access. I can only tell you the experience of Canadians, but I don't know if it's going to be helpful. In Canada, when we're struggling with these issues, we stop going to the US government, meaning the president, and we start going to Congress. We go to Senate, to the lower house, well, mostly to the Senate and to the governors of individual states. And we try and build consensus within the US for change. Because the US, every state is not monolithic. Every state has interest groups that are pushing for what they want. Finding the right leverage points for that helps. To be able to go to Texas, which is a center for electronics, and make a case in Texas. Or I guess for medical equipment, the Minnesota is the US Center for somehow being in that place with a governor from Minnesota or a senator from Minnesota and asking, how can we get into your market? What do we have to do to make you happy? Might be a very specific and narrow approach. That's the approach that Canadians take. I don't know if it'll work for Indonesia, but that's the Canadian approach. In terms of remedies, building capacity is very high on the list of at least some countries. I'm going to guess Australia puts a big emphasis on it. I'm not sure. Canada has put a huge emphasis on capacity building within CARICOM. In particular, we've seen huge successes in Costa Rica's expertise and in the ability of Costa Rican officials to move up in the WTO. Again, I wish that we could do more, and demanding more is the only way to get further. But I am sympathetic that it's been way slower than what you want and need. So I don't want to be Panglossian about this. How did China do it? That's a really, really good question. China did two things, one of which Indonesia is close to already doing. China has a huge market share, a huge domestic market. Indonesia is so close to that point in the way that world investors are looking at it right now. So you're close to that one piece. The other piece that China did, people look at China and say, oh, it's all about the subsidies. It's all about the central government organizing. Put that in a little ball and take it off the table. What China did was opening and reform, incremental reform, not being done by the central government, but by being done in agriculture in the south, special economic zones in Shenzhen, in Guangzhou. These small-scale experiments that then people like Deng Xiaoping could look at and say, hey, this works, right? So you think about his southern tour in 1992. When he is standing in Shenzhen, he puts on a construction hat, goes to the top of a high-rise building in Guangzhou with national television, and people in Beijing for the first time in their lives are saying, we can build 20-story buildings? We didn't know we could do that. So this idea that it's all centrally planned in Beijing and it all filtered out is the exact opposite of how China made its successes. So the idea of experimentation by government to help build institutions that support development, that's fundamental. To think that the WTO is going to do it for you is to my sense, missing what we understand about long-term economic development. Institution building domestically that supports innovation, that is the mantra that we need to start with. The WTO can help a bit with that, but it can also hinder it, as you know. So when you look at things like, so let me just, so those are, that to me is the mantra. Don't look for the WTO to solve all of your problems. And look to the WTO for the parts where it can actually hurt you. So as an example, on agriculture, beyond the market access issues, as agriculture has become a high-tech industry, it is now falls under the purview of TRIPS. So what the Americans, for example, did under the USMCA, the agreement with Canada and Mexico, this last renegotiations, is they added something entirely unexpected. I was warned that we should expect the unexpected. The unexpected was new laws about agricultural chemicals that we had never anticipated. So making sure that in the area of biosimilars and in agricultural, genetics, that the U.S. does not impose through TRIPS and through competition clauses things that we really think hurt humanity, only help rich American companies. You have to be on guard for that, and you have to be on guard for it in a very careful way. That is, the U.S. knows that if they put any amendments, say, to TRIPS, everybody's going to be watching. But if they stick it in, say, the competition section, nobody's going to notice. So it's very, very important to keep your eye on what is fundamentally important for long-term growth. I'm hearing market access, of course, but there's other things that America is going to do to try and constrain the ability of countries like Indonesia to grow in the future. If you ever want me to help you look at U.S. initiatives and to see how insidious they can be, please. You'll notice that I'm an academic, so I can use the word U.S. without any hesitation. And then there's a whole host of other issues that you raise. I'll say just one thing that's worth mentioning. And I think, Lili, we were talking a little bit about this yesterday. Every agreement that we sign that includes words like equity, diversity, inclusion that is coming from more developed countries is, to my mind, a cheap way of dealing with the real issues that developed countries face. The real issue is when we write trade agreements, they have to be embedded in the larger social context of the country. So right now, you have, for example, in the US, a trade negotiating team, and then you have Congress writing laws about how to build a social safety net. Those two cannot be separate. When the US is negotiating a trade agreement, it needs to turn to Congress and say, how are you going to provide us with the funds we need for trade displacement, for worker re-education, for insurance? Those somehow, 30 years ago, became separate topics, much to the detriment of the ability of the US to write successful agreements anymore. So I would recommend reading, there's a woman in Tulane, a lawyer called Kim Klausing, who is pushing very hard to try and get developed countries to stop talking about inclusion and the role of and diversity in isolation from their domestic agenda. The international domestic agendas cannot be separated, and it should not be the problem of developing countries. It should be fully the problem of rich countries to provide for their own citizens. And then writing the trade agreements with a full domestic social safety net becomes so much less threatening. And then the last thing I'll say is, the U.S. administration, I think unless you don't follow U.S. politics closely, you don't even have to follow closely. We are all disappointed that the Biden administration, in its second year of its first term, has fallen flat on its face on the international trade issue. It's between a rock and a hard place, and I do not expect any movement in the next many years on international trade. The U.S. is going to continue to follow on Trump's policies for a long time to come. because the Biden administration is caught between the left and right of the Democratic Party. Don't hold your breath for any new negotiations or initiatives from the US. It's going to stay bad. We have to find our own work. The US is not the center of the universe around which everything gravitates. We have to find our own approaches, like the Montreal Protocols, to work around what the US is doing.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Traveler. Dr. Lan, would you like to respond to some question?
Thank you. Actually, that I don't really address the question per se, but I just to give some idea on how to how the WTO reform actually can be done in such a way that it helps the global economic growth. I think the fact is that WTO is now moving away from its traditional, I can say, orthodox and traditional way of business. I think starting from the trade facilitation agreement, you know that it's no longer under single undertaking and then single undertaking is just the name of the game. While the actual game, the rule has changed, and each and every step that WTO has been undertaking in the last many years is really to focus on concrete, tangible steps. And the so-called single undertaking is actually captured in a very narrow perspective. So that, but it means that actually WTO is still trying to find a good way out of the current impasse. I do believe that this should be the way forward. And I think that in addition to that, trying to focus on a tangible outcome, WTO should also to promote a global solution. The solution for to address a particular topic on the global scale. That is what WTO need and should play a bigger role. Why I say so? Because now everybody in we know that at the regional level, we talk about something actually that we cannot create our own solution by our own self, like sustainable development. You cannot say that ASEAN has our own modality to promote sustainability without a bigger picture of how the global economy is will be, and then WTO can play more significant role in that rule setting and less market access negotiation. I don't think that WTO at this juncture can be a best instrument to promote the market access, but the rule setting is still a viable way that WTO can play, and focusing on a global solution in a sustainability, circular economy, in a digital area. So that, and I also think that in somehow WTO members are moving toward that direction. Even though it's slow, it's much slower than many other regions, including ASEAN. ASEAN, we are very much advanced in some of the conversation in sustainability in digital, but it doesn't mean that we lose our bigger side in coming up with a global solution for that. And WTO should focus on some pilot, or you may call it like a plurilateral solution. So like focusing on some group of countries who share the same interest. I think that should be the way forward. And eventually that the outcome of successful WTO reform would very much depend on the maturity of the political, how to say, solution. I may say that you cannot really hope that by the next 2 months or even years that WTO can really have some institutional change that we actually expected for fair, open. It really, we have thing is evolving, and we will get there. But when and how, actually that we cannot say at this point. Now, each and every member state of ASEAN, WTO, should play a good role, like a good player of the organization. And I'm sure that probably in a couple of years, the solution is out there, and WTO reform will actually bring a good, inclusive, open, and fair mechanism that benefit all. So that is what I want to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lan. Pak Dandi, you like to respond some questions?
I don't know. I think everyone already spoke all the best words of all the discussions. Probably from my point of view about how we can, the question from Mas Noel is about the landing zone. I was here about 1 year, 3 months. And within that a year, I've experienced MC12, experience one of the, I think it's quite tough because we even have to extend the MC12 for 1 day just to have an outcome. Before it was a package where 8 outcome is in the table, 8 issues is on the table. There's agriculture, worker program, troops waiver, what else? Motor custom duties, and many more. And we negotiate. So the last that agreed by members is at the end of the day said that 7 outcomes. One very important outcomes is agriculture to so many members. It's failed to be one of the outcomes because it's a very difficult issues. The chair of COAS is difficult to gather the issues of 7 pillar and put it down in one of the chair text, back and forth, revised document here and there. So I think the idea of after that, what happened on MC12 is everyone is very hard trying to find a way that we always say is out of the box. Even when ambassadors have always mentioned, please let's do this, what we call SBB, small, simple, brief, beauty. So all that have to be SBB in terms of how we produce the documents. Make it simple, make it brief, make it beauty. And so we try to find our missions here, and any of the members' missions here, try to talk with one each other. The difficult thing is the trust issues. If one member's saying a statement, the other member is taking differently in terms of, this member tried to block, or this member tried to move into different directions. So we try to build that here in Geneva. And if we talk about a landing zone, is at this point, what we try to do is to create a better communications between each other, between members, between ambassadors, between experts, between attaché, and we try to keep things moving. Like we are happy the chair of NGR has been appointed, and the chair of COAS has been appointed, and it keeps the ball moving. And by that, still the idea of some members, you mentioned about we do it plurilaterally for agriculture. That's some of the ideas. But of course, many questions raised because if we do this plurilateral, who will benefit? Is this the members that join the plurilateral only, or other members can also benefit? So it's the idea of having a fair outcome is also important. A balanced outcome is also important. Plurilateral, is it balanced? Is it fair for the members? The example of GSI SDR is one of the example of a case that we can study more deeply. So, and some of the ideas about well, we move forward is, of course, we open for any academia like to fill in, give their inputs, give their thoughts, and also for them to know what is going on in Rampart and in the room CR is also important. What happened in the green room is also important. So I think I'll stop there, and hopefully we can have more input on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Dandri. I think we still have time for a couple more questions. Please feel free to raise your hand if you have any question or comments. Yes, I would like to invite maybe thoughts or comments from country delegation in this room. Please. Mr. Simon? Or
thank you, Pak, and thank you all for the opportunity to come today. It really is, I think, very important that we continue to talk about ways to resolve the issues that we see in the WTO, and opportunities like this, part of that. I was quite interested in Pak Dandi's presentation in particular, and his recommendations, and I was just wondering if there's any thinking in the room in particular about the specific WTO rules that do impede the implementation of policies that would support growth. Now, is that something that is being thought about on the Indonesian side at the moment and identified? And if so, I'd be keen to understand what you see as those particular WTO policies. Thank you.
thank you, Pak Simon. Any other comments? Sir, you like to have some comments? Oh, no, okay.
Simple question was the Professor Daniel, what is the differences and the similarity of the developed country and developing country to the reform? And second, just a question about the phenomena SOC, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and also BRIC. Is there Shanghai Cooperation Organization is a part of the other wings of the China, Russia, and no India and Turkey joined to this SCO, or let's say disobey or against the WTO? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. One question for Pak Dandi and one question for Prof. Traveler. I think we can start from Pak Dandi.
All right, thank you. I hope, Simon, you're from UK because your ambassadors here is also named Simon. So I see the similarity of their questions. Basically about growth, I think it's important from all members of developing and LDCs how we are managed to find our way in the corridor where multilateral regime, rules-based multilateral trading system is applied domestically, market access, the issues of subsidies, the issues of what else? Remedies is being used in the way that there's a constraint from members developing an LDCs. So the growth that we always put in the WTO, the development issues that we always put also in WTO, is how the idea of SNDT need to be on the place where policy space is needed for members, and we also seeing that is the proper policy space where others can still have benefits. Indonesia still have benefits, and other WTO members still have benefits of our market access, of our domestic market. So it's a way that the growth of Indonesia economy is still in line. We still abide and uphold the multilateral trading system. So that is the balance that we try always put forward in our positions. It means that not just by statement, it means by our negotiations with other members, either with China, with the US, with the EU, with the UK, India, even with our ASEAN members. We have the diversity of positions in ASEAN. Indonesia, some differences between certain members, certain developing members, certain supporting also in the ideas of LDCs members. So it's in a sense that what we try to do is put forward that we are developing members that respect the growing economy of any of the other members, and we try to see that the policy space is still needed, and it's very important to have that respect from us and also from other members. So I think I'll stop there. I hope that explains. Thank you.
Pak Dandi, Prof. Traveler, there's a question about the constellation, how strike the balance between the developed and developing countries within the WTO, and what is your take on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? No, okay.
Might be Pak Dani, yeah. Pak Dani,
Yeah.
as a diplomat, you already, you mentioned in your slide that coordinating and synergic, if I'm not mistaken. Do you mapping the differences and similarity of developed country and developing country to reform the WTO as according our interest or according our national interest?
If I may, Pak, you can see in my presentation, there's a quite divergence between developed and developing members in their positions in issues of transparency and monitoring and the issues of negotiations. But at least there's a wide member engagement in the dispute settlement, because a certain member seeing that the dispute settlement mechanism that we have, especially in the second tiers on the appellate body, should not create another regime. It should not create another different interpretations. So the idea of we try to balance the developed and developing LDC's positions is we are trying to accommodate one another in terms of the lighter issues. such as we try to communicate in a regular meeting, not the negotiation meeting, because usually in WTO we have a regular meeting and negotiations meeting. Regular meeting if a committee meeting on trade and goods, committee meeting on trade and environment, but negotiation meeting is on agriculture, negotiations on trips, negotiations on fishery subsidies. So we try to use that fora, that moment that we can engage with one another, formal, informal, and also it's very important that we put on the proposals, because by that proposal it means that it's written and is documented for a longer period of time in WTO document. And the thing that we are trying to do, all of us, is to have what we call evidence-based negotiations. And although it sometimes is quite difficult, because one member giving an evidence that is a different evidence from the other members, but at least by showing evidence and analysis, it brings a good notions for negotiator here, because we are negotiators. Even some of us is lawyers, and we need to know more what really happens in agriculture. We need to know more what really happens in fishery subsidies. We need to know more about the subsidies itself. And so by that data evidence-based negotiations, especially like I said, the participations of academia in giving analysis, giving input, giving research is also important, because it gives us a better understanding, a better view, a wide range, a helicopter view of how we negotiate. And maybe by that we can find a good landing zone. You know, many times between Indonesia and, if I mention Brazil, we have challenging positions. But in one sense, when we have a position from other members, we can have collaborations between Indonesia and Brazil. So it's dynamic things that important. Each of the members here in Geneva is we need to respect each other and to have an evidence-based negotiation. So I think those two are some of the points that I like to raise. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Dandi. So any more questions from the floor? All right. Otherwise, I hope I have my own question. First, maybe for Prof. Traveler and also to Pak Dandi. In this proposed reform, and of course in the ongoing reform, there has been discussion between flexibilities versus protectionism. In this case, what are the limits of the flexibilities in action? Because we have to have limits one way or another. And then Pak Dandi also mentioned about offensive and defensive strategies in the WTO. What is the current position of Indonesia, especially on the agriculture-related issues and also fisheries in the short run? Is there any strategy undertaken to strengthen the alliance with the G33 on these issues? Yeah.
The intent strategy might be in the visible area. If you have iceberg phenomena, you can say what is strategy global, but the intent strategy is not yours capacity. I have to intervene, Pak. Sorry, Pak.
Yeah, sure. Sure. Thank you, Pak, for your remarks. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you very much. I think if we're talking about WTO reforms, it is actually been proven during the MC12. I think Pak Dandi also elaborated quite clearly previously on how we are actually departing from what so-called, as Dr. Liu called it, traditional principles of the WTO. For example, like the single undertaking is actually, we can say that it is no longer being adopted during the MC9. When there are interim solutions are introduced in the middle of the discussions, and then it becomes an outcome of a certain ministerial conference. So the fact that the Doha round, as Dr. Kasan elaborated previously, is no longer pulling through any breakthrough in terms of outcome, then members consider that to be an obstacle to do so, then they will actually take a certain steps, and that is what's happening. And also the MC12. The MC12, there is a distinct phenomena that I would like to raise in this case. For example, if we go through the fisheries subsidies discussions, there are 4 elements out of the fisheries subsidies, but they're only agreed to the 3 elements of the fisheries subsidies. So they're leaving it out those who are very difficult to actually reach into an agreement and start gaining all those low-hanging fruit sort of discussions, even though it is the lowest denomination during the discussions of the negotiations, but actually it pulled through and it manages to give results. I do not want to sort of like what I can say, but it is facts that the leadership of the DG at that moment during in the green room, I think Pak Dandi also experienced there, Pak Dubes, is quite pertinent in this case. It's quite important to actually try things. And one of those things that you have elaborated, the empowerment to the Secretariat. Now, I do feel that one of the reasons why the US is in fact, or one of the WTO members is in fact trying to bring or trying to object the dysfunctioning of the appellate body. One of them is that they thought that some of the facts that the Secretariat of the WTO is doing is considered not to be very much clear whether they are neutral or not. So this is also becoming some of the issue that all the WTO members is facing. So the neutrality of the Secretariat of the WTO also I don't know whether we are actually empowering them more in terms of what actually we are empowering them. Now, I think the WTO is more of an approach of evolution rather than a revolution in point of view. It actually corrects its own error from the previous error. Like the MC12 is the correction of the MC11. So basically in Buenos Aires, you do not bring anything except export subsidies. But then they realized that the demand of the developing countries, the demand of the developed countries is so humongous and high, so they would believe they would be able to take a decision there in the MC12s, because they are in the brink of the question of the relevance, whether WTO is any longer relevant to the rest of the world. So I think that approach will go on and on and on, because by design, the Marrakesh Agreement itself that you cannot alter the WTO without consensus, and everything in this world is always connects to those who are being advantaged by or being privileged by the existing regulations, or those who are actually detrimented by the existing regulations. So we will not be able to give a consensus of those who are privileged and who are not that privileged. So that's sort of difficulties. And I think Jagdish wrote a lot of articles on this consensus-based sort of approach that might become the weakness of the WTO. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Nur Rahman. Yes, please.
First, that was very eloquent, and I think that's bang on. I'm an academic. I sit in a little office. I write formulas with Greek symbols. I do programming and so on. Why did I decide that I should be in a place like this? I decided it because I'd looked at the evolution, not the evolution, but what has happened in the world trading system over the last about 5 years. And it is ugly. It is uglier than it has ever been. And in my view, and because I'm an academic, I don't have to pretend about which countries I'm talking about. There are two countries that are tearing apart the system for their own self-interest, and there is all the rest of us. You were asking about, the bridge between rich and poor countries, developing and developed countries. This may be a moment to start thinking about what that bridge is. That all of us are being victimized by the activities of the two largest economies in the world. And maybe that is where we stand together, and that's how we try to build something constructive going forward. That's why I'm here.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Trevor. Pak Dandi, you have answer to this?
Well, pretty much that. I do agree, because we are always communicating between me and Mas Noor, and also colleague from Directorate WTO negotiation. So, but if I may add about the way forward is also important for Indonesia on the negotiation up to MC12. Some issues that we are trying to discuss in the next MC13, such as agriculture, fishery subsidies, WTO reform, TRIPS waiver, moratorium custom duties, which will elapse on March 2024, just a couple of weeks before MC13. And of course, some of the bilateral GSI, either the investment facilitation development, IFD, or e-commerce. So both those have a good chance to become an outcome on the MC13. So within that, it's very important for all of us to keep gathering, have a discussion like this, have a more deep thematic session on certain issues. It will be very, very helpful for us in preparing the way forward for the MC13.
Thank you. Dr. Lan, you have some comments on this? Okay. Well, my last call for comments and questions. Oh yeah, Lili, please.
Thank you. I'm academic by brain and by heart, but I'm having business blood. So let's be pragmatic. What can we suggest from this meeting? So please allow me to ask, I think from our discussions, we have two low-hanging fruits that we can suggest as the results of the meeting. And I need your suggestions and advice. One is on the plurilateral agreements in responding to new emerging issues. Okay, so plurilateral agreements on emerging issues. Then I would like to hear more advice how this can be worked in more pragmatic way. The second one is on the monitoring and transparency. One that we are having now is self-notifications, but it didn't work so far. So how can we make this monitoring and transparency, considering since the global financial crisis until now, we have growing protectionist measures, right? So how can we improve this monitoring and transparency mechanisms in the WTO? So that's two questions to all speakers and audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I would like to start from Dr. Lan.
For the first question, I think I somehow either imply or clearly said that plurilateral initiative or arrangement could be a good avenue for for the WTO to advance the rule-setting negotiation, especially in the area where we need really a global solution, sustainable development and trade, digital economy, subsidy. We cannot do it alone. So anything that we need a global solution, we do need WTO to set a good frame, a good concept, and also approach, so that the WTO members and the regional institutions can follow. Now, the second question is about the current setting of how to improve the ASEAN, the WTO monitoring or trade policy review or whatever. I think WTO is still, in my view, doing pretty well in submitting a quite so-called independence report to monitor the implementation of the WTO commitments. But at the same time, I also think that this process can be further strengthened. Since I'm talking from my own experience in dealing with trade policy review, I think that this process should be more inclusive, in such a way that the perspective of the country concerned need to be reflected in the report, so that the report can be more neutral. The second thing is that, yes, WTO should strengthen its research capacity. I don't know how to do that, but I think that WTO is somehow, in terms of the capacity, it seems not that as good and as strong as other institutions like World Bank in doing the research, so that they can provide more evidence, more scientific, more economic evidence to facilitate the trade negotiation or the discussion. So lastly, I agree with the suggestion, lastly, just about how to do that. I hope that it should be the way forward.
Thank you, Dr. Lan. Prof. Traveler?
Thank you. So Lili, maybe I should start with notification. The problem with notification, the main problem with notification is what economists would call incentive incompatible, or what I think a lawyer would call problems with rules of evidence. That is to say that a country that notifies may be confronted in committee and then in panel with a set of legally written minutes to a meeting that says, hey, in fact, you did all of these things and they're non-compliant. So we have, in criminal courts, we have rules of evidence to say you can't implicate yourself. I understand, I'm not a lawyer, but I understand that the WTO actually does have rules of evidence which say that you cannot implicate yourself. So we need to make those rules more flourishing. In other words, we need to use those rules and not just have them on paper. I'm not sure how far we'll get with that. Further we will get, though, is to insert into committees technical experts, so that the conversation moves from politicians arguing to protect their own self-interest to having technical experts discussing in detail what exactly is happening here. So we need to require more committees to open up to non-professional WTO types. They have to be, I'm not saying they have to be academics, but they have to be people with deep understanding of the issues who are impartial. The third step, and here it comes to what you were saying about research capacity at the WTO. Actually, the WTO has a great deal of research capacity, but it also faces enormous constraints to, frankly, be muzzled. So it's very difficult, for example, for the chief economist to go to any country and say, we see this issue with your country, without the ambassador from that country saying, actually, I don't think we charged you with thinking. That's not part of your job. Your job is to represent members. Right? So that's a very difficult position for the research capacity is there, the ability to speak candidly is not. Which is why I feel it's very important to start thinking about an independent body that is not muzzled, that is representative, diverse, capable, and unmuzzled. The WTO has to start thinking about that possibility. The WTO is not responsible for what is said, but at least it's an independent voice in much the same way, for example, if we were talking about a nuclear emergency, the United States does not just go to one agency. There is the agency that knows most about it, but then you have a whole bunch of independent agencies saying, checks and balances, are you sure you're making the right decisions? The WTO perhaps needs to surround itself with expertise. It doesn't have to listen to it, but it cannot muzzle it either.
Thank you, Prof. Treffler. Pak Dandi?
Well, the good thing is when you talk, the last person is easier to summarize. And I say, I agree. So basically, most of that been mentioned by Dr. Lan and Professor Treffler is actually been what we try to do here in WTO in Geneva. For some reasons, because again, this is a member-driven organization. Such actions, such decision need to be inclusive, need to be taken into account by other members, groups. Just for say, on the TRIPS committee, where we ask for other international organizations to come in and give inputs on like NSVD, I believe. So it takes quite a while, quite a lot, several meetings to have that organization to join the meeting as an observer, as giving input. So the idea of those is really important for us to do it. The basic thing is that we need to do it fast. So we need to do it to have a bigger impact on the multilateral trading. And keep in mind, we have 164 members, various development, various area, various demography. Many have various interests also. And so that's it. So way forward, I think the most important is we need to move fast. We need to engage more and give an outcome for every of the issues. Either it's low-hanging fruit, high-hanging fruit, middle-hanging fruit. So
yeah,
that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Dandi. As an academic myself, I have a long list of questions, but I have to restrain myself because we have just arrived at the end of our discussion. We hope that we will have another session after we internalize all the information that we received today. I'm not supposed to conclude, but allow me to highlight some key and important takeaways from our discussion. From Prof. Treffler, we learned that the subsidy is becoming issue now, and we have to deal with it. And we also have to treat the plurilateralism as not as a threat, but rather something to begin, a negotiation that can become multilateral agreements. From Dr. Lan, we learned that ASEAN is very much in line with WTO. We share the same spirit, and ASEAN is always embracing open and soft regionalism. Welcome to enlarge the cooperation involving other countries. From Pak Dandi, suggests there's a reform in negotiations and monitoring and transparency. And also some other key points from audience is that how to punish, how to deal with the process which is not transparent, and some other suggestions. But my own takeaways from this discussion is that first, in WTO there are some rules, regulation, right? So the elements of justice is there, but does it mean that all the countries can access that justice? The feeling of justice is not there. So I have the impression that the WTO has shifted away from the original spirit of consensus into the body with full of regulation. That's why some country, the large power did some unilateral action. They say, okay, I do this. If you don't like it, please go to the dispute settlement body. Please, there's a way to deal with it. Yes, but the damage is done already, right? And it disappoints other member state, of course. So we have to deal with that. And my other suggestion for Pak Kasan is that Pak Kasan, please, maybe starting from next year, send some students to do graduate studies under Prof. Traveler in Toronto. We need more expert on that, right? Yes, Prof. Traveler. And also, I have a graduate class to teach this afternoon. Allow me to use some of the insight I got from this event to teach to use to my students. They will be happy about it. So let's give another round of applause for our speakers. Over to you, MC.
Thank you, Bapak Ravindo, for bringing us to a very productive session today. Now we've come to the end of this event. On behalf of the organizing committees, we would like to say thank you for your active participation and contribution today. Please apologize if there are mistakes throughout the event.